This is Steve Downs, the voice of Master Chief, Spartan 117. Welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. Anthony and Skylar will take it from here. Master Chief, out.
Welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. My name is Anthony Nicolosi.
And I'm Skylar Sokol.
And today we are going to be talking narrative design, Skylar. Ba, 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 ba.
That's right. The narrative design theme song that we worked so hard on before the podcast, and you nailed it.
Yeah, I mean, narrative design, what the frick are we talking about?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, this is your topic. You've been obsessed with a book lately about screenwriting, and so you want to talk a tiny bit about that? Oh, about cats. Who writes screenplays.
The fans should know I love saving cats. Specifically, I love when Blake Snyder explains how to save the cat in his book titled Save the Cat.
Wow.
It is a book intended as like aimed at screenwriters, specifically in this case, Hollywood screenwriters, right? However, I've been reading it. It was recommended by Mike Bithell on the Play, Watch, Listen podcast, and the man has some, there's reason to listen to him on the narrative front from his work in his games. Thomas is alone. What was the name of that? I think it was alone.
I don't know.
Anyway, he highly recommended it. He thought it was extremely beneficial from a story structure standpoint. And I was reading it, I was listening to it, and at one point Blake Snyder breaks down how, in his opinion, to have a good structure, a good skeleton, if you will, to the story, he breaks out a 15-beat structure, right?
Nice.
So the story needs...
So it's in like this 15-4 time?
Yeah, 15-4. It's really...
Cool.
Catchy.
Yeah, some Hindustani raga.
Yeah. Now, the 15 beats that he outlines don't necessarily line up, I think, to like what would be nice to experience in a video game per se, but there are certain core elements of it that got me thinking about how hard it is to write a good story, at least looking at it this way, in a game. Specifically because games have, they have a few unique elements to them that other forms of media like movies or books don't have, primarily the autonomous interaction of the player to some extent. Right?
So I have a question. Since we're talking about, you say it's hard to write a good story for a game, right? What does a good story mean to you?
Yeah, let me,
for a game.
In that sentence, what I meant specifically was it's hard to write a story that can somewhat adhere to the skeleton that he outlines.
Which is what you would define as a good story, a story based on his skeleton, or...
Yeah, I think that this skeleton's a way that we can think about it. And let me actually outline the 15 beats that he says. I'll just say their names, and I think they kind of speak for themselves to give you an idea. So these are the 15 beats in order, chronological order, that the story, in this case, the movie, you can say should have. The first one is termed the opening image. Second, theme stated. Third, the setup. Fourth, the catalyst. Fifth, the debate. Skylar's favorite part. Six, the break into two. Split up. Number 7, B story. That's a very screenwriting kind of term. 8, fun and games. 9, the midpoint. 10, the bad guys close in. 11, all is lost. 12, dark night of the soul. 13, break into 3. And then 14, the finale. Finished off with 15, which is the final image.
I gotcha.
So, the idea is that a theme is stated up front. There's a setup that backs up the premise for the theme. There's a catalyst that kind of throws the whole world in the setting already set up kind of into dismay and kind of on its head, and gives credence to the antithesis. There you go. There you go. Got it. First try. And then there's this rest of the structure that kind of makes it engaging. There's the hero, like he gets into a bunch of details, and we and etc. But it's more or less this idea of having a theme, setting it up, having something that contrasts it to provide this alternate view, and sort of the journey of exploring the there's this first part where the hero, if you will, kind of sort of succeeds in his mission and his theme, but then the bad guys kind of get back at him, or there's problems, whatever, that kind of make that initial success sort of flip on its head, and the hero's kind of in dismay, whatever. And then there's this finale where finally the hero comes back and resolves.
So is this structure meant to give us like a structure for all what he would consider good stories? So because like I'm just like thinking in my head of a lot of stories that I consider good that I don't know follow this structure necessarily.
So as he gets through the book, and quite frankly, I'm not prepared to, like, without reading it literally right now, to like tell you, but he actually, like, comedies, dramas of all kinds, like movies at least do follow this structure, even though they're not necessarily like, when bad guys close in, it's not necessarily like there's a super villain or some shit. Like sometimes it's just the tax evasion penalties catch up to him, or some shit. So anyway, the point being is that this has a clear structure, and when you're in a medium like TV, movies, TV, or a book, you can lay out the direction of the story any way you want. You can have the characters participate in any way they want. Of course, it needs to be well done, and what's the right word here, sewn together in a way that's actually like enjoyable to read and everything. The characters have to have meaningful development, but the main thing is that you, the writer, or you have control over it. The reader is just strictly consuming it. There's no interaction there. So that's different in games, right? And I'm wondering,
I don't know if that's different in games, right? Because the reader or the consumer is still immersed in the universe, and games immerse you in a different way, but it's still just all about immersion, right? Like the reason the interactivity of games is compelling is because it provides additional immersion that you wouldn't normally be able to get from those other mediums. But those other mediums are also seeking the same immersion in the universe. So not necessarily as you being in the universe, but just being connected deeply with the characters and such.
So for example, let's touch on the first beat is the opening image, and the 15th is the final image. And he makes a big deal about the fact that between the first and the 15th, like literally those two beats, there should be a clear distinction in like the journey that the player or the hero or the experience has gone on. It doesn't even necessarily have to be the hero, and sort of the growth and learning and emotional journey that's happened there. So for example, let's give an example like a game. So let's say there's a game that starts out with like an imagery of like an oppressed
can you give like a real example of a movie or something? Or
not really.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, not quickly. I'm kind of thinking of like
just something
Half-Life.
real rather than something
Half-Life.
theoretical.
I'm thinking of Half-Life Alyx. So I don't know if you've watched people stream it recently, but
and I don't want you to spoil the final image of a game on our podcast that came out this year.
More of the initial image I wanted to use as a basis. So like I can't remember what's the name of like the agency or whatever the fuck who's the bad guys, whatever those bad guys are. They their machines are sort of patrolling through the city. Their guards are kind of through. There's a clear like oppressed state kind of a feel, like the state is oppressing you kind of a feel to how you're navigating the streets, right? So let's just say there was a game that started in that way, and that by the end explored the like basically breaking free of that oppressed overlord thing, and that the final image is more or less that city freed from these people, right?
Sure.
Pretty straightforward understanding, right? Literally that first image, right? If you need to, as a level designer, in order for me to make sure that I notice the oppressed state, you need to design it such that like when I start the game, I open up into that apartment like Half-Life Alyx does, and there's basically like just two windows, right? And you see things. Like you literally can't do anything else there's no other way you can kind of enter into the world, right?
Sure.
You, though, technically, in a game, could design that a different way. You could say, like, we're going to plop the guy in the middle of the plaza or whatever, and we're going to eventually, once they navigate themselves to the main street of the city, they'll see the state. But this is sort of the
so there's
the
a game called Homefront. I believe is what it was called, which is sort of similar. And and it starts by like immersing you in this oppressed state where you like see people on the streets and participate in like people getting oppressed and stuff like that. So it sounds like just by you walking around and experiencing it, and like someone like harasses you and all that shit.
So the point I'm trying to make not is that these narratives can't exist, but that literally for you, for example, in a movie, you have complete execution over the camera, how it's going to pan over the scene,
right?
How it's going, what the viewer is going to see. Over the book, you have total control over the way that imagery is going to be painted with the words you use and this context, the setting that you paint out, the way you want to paint it out. With the game, you don't necessarily have control. It depends on what your design preferences are, but let's say that you're allowing them to move freely around the space and whatever. You're not guaranteed that they're going to look out window A at the angle that communicates this vista of oppression of an oppressed state. They might just like walk down the stairs,
sure,
and not look out that window,
right?
So that is kind of what I'm saying is like a unique challenge for games.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is why very commonly game stories are presented through cutscenes and through, at least traditionally in like the past, when designers or developers weren't willing to take these like story risks that they take now. Basically, games were just a series of gameplay sections followed by cutscenes that conveyed the story.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now you have way larger, I was going to say portfolio, I don't know if that's the right word, but you've played way more games, period, but especially on the narrative front. And I wanted to get your thoughts, because in my opinion, from what like some of these narrative driven games give from a design perspective, Half-Life Alyx is a 3-dimensional space. You have largely control over where you go. Like you can kind of go wherever you want as long as the level design allows you to.
Sure.
Other games though are more restrictive on that front, including some narrative games. I'm also thinking of like the Pony game, Pony Island. Like at least my perception is like I perceive that I'm much more limited when I'm playing that game than if I'm in the Half-Life world.
To some degree. I mean, there are like open world sections of that game, and there is like stuff hidden in the menus of that game, which is not something that exists in Half-Life Alyx. So it's just different, I think. But yeah. How
do you think of some of for example, What Remains of Edith Finch?
Mm-hmm.
That's a game highly regarded from a narrative standpoint. What do you think that some of the design decisions they make help the narrative delivery, if you will? And which ones do you think?
So I think there's 3 types of narrative video games. I think there's games that are all like the narrative is the main focus of the game. There's games where the gameplay is the main focus and there may be little to no narrative or just a skeleton of a narrative. And then there's games that try to do them in a combined way. And how effective those games are at doing that is like a very wide range, right? Like I said, I think in the past, a lot of games relied on cutscenes to convey the narrative in an effective way, which basically just turns the game into a movie, right? A movie with some interactive pieces in between. And I think in the like modern gaming, that just isn't effective anymore. I just don't find that effective for me. Like I'm not that interested in a game where I just like have a million cutscenes, right? You want the gameplay to convey the story if it's really effective. Portal being like a great example of that. Portal 1 and Portal 2 even more, of the story existing in the universe you're playing and nowhere else, right? Like you're experiencing the story. And I think those are the games that really meet the narrative in the most effective way. What Remains of Edith Finch does this as well, because although the design is very, like, you know where you're supposed to go, it's relatively well, like, obvious where you're supposed to go, but you don't have to. You can go other places, and there is stuff to find in those other places, like Easter egg visuals or stuff that expands upon the story. So I think that like the real challenge when it comes to putting a narrative in a video game is making the narrative the experience and not just something that is like tacked on via cutscenes or just is ignored completely, right? Or just becomes super convoluted because there's so much random crap in it because you want like to saturate your game with side quests so that the player will play for like 100 hours, and then the main story gets lost because like everyone in the main story is talking about how urgently things need to happen, and then you go to a side quest where you like help a llama get across the street while like a city is getting like destroyed, right?
Yeah. I had that, I liked Red Dead Redemption 2 a lot, and I thought its narrative was I really enjoyed its narrative. But that was one thing. Like, you could get to a certain point in the story and then like literally just hunt around and shit,
right?
Like indefinitely.
It feels so arbitrary. Yeah. I hate when that happens to me in open world. I think it's one of the reasons I've shied away from open world games more and more.
Yeah. And I'm actually just thinking about it. Overall, though, I do feel that Red Dead Redemption 2 in particular, compared to like one game I thought did it mediocre to say at best, it was Destiny 2. It had this kind of concept. Play some missions, get some worlds open. You could fuck around indefinitely and then decide to play more missions and get the other worlds open. Red Dead there were points where it did kind of like, there's a point where you go to Cuba. There wasn't any like kind of free roaming there. It was like just they moved you along the narrative at that point. And there would be points where I'm going to honestly, now that I'm kind of thinking about it, generally speaking, Red Dead did it pretty tastefully, in my opinion, where there were moments in the narrative where it really should just move forward and they forced you to.
Right.
So anyway, now.
Interesting.
You said you didn't really, you don't really care for open world ones. I want to cycle back to another game. You said Portal 1 and Portal 2. I haven't played Portal 2, but I played most of Portal 1.
But without sound, so it doesn't count.
Not true. So not
true.
Because
like 90% of the story is presented in the sound.
I played with sound. The problem is that I didn't pay like a lot of attention to the sound. And it wasn't necessarily loud, but like it was there. And I missed it. Like we talk about all the time. You're like, I talk to you or talk to other people, and they're like, yeah, what did you think of the story so far? And I haven't finished it, but I'm just like, well, like, what are you talking about? Like, what's the name of the robot? GLaDOS, right? They're like, she's kind of funny, like the aggressively funny or passively aggressive, whatever. I'm like, not to me.
You were not listening. Yeah,
robot just talking.
Yeah.
So just the point being there, I'm not saying Portal should have had cutscenes, but if it had cutscenes, I would have known GLaDOS was like actually there.
But I think the game would have sucked if it had cutscenes. Like the fact that she's talking to you while you're experiencing the puzzle, like is so much more meaningful than if you just like watched her talk and then played the puzzle with nothing.
Yeah.
Like I think the seamless integration of the narrative with the gameplay is like what makes video games amazing. And like I think games didn't take advantage of it like seriously until recently.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm going to say I also think the technology in games has improved such that they can kind of communicate the cinematic idea they want to better.
Totally, without needing to pre-render a cutscene to get the like visual things across.
Yeah.
Or
like the camera control. Yeah,
another game to bring up is like Gone Home and other walking simulators not like that came before What Remains of Edith Finch. Like Gone Home and Everybody's Gone to the Rapture and some other games like that, Firewatch, are really about discovering the story for yourself and like finding the pieces and piecing them together. Another game that does this really well is Return of the Aubergine. This is basically like a mystery detective game where you're like exploring scenes and finding clues and synthesizing things on your own, and it doesn't hold your hand at all, but the story is all there for you to find. Like these are the kinds of experiences that can't be literally cannot be accomplished by movies. Maybe by books if you format a book in a really unique way, but definitely not by movies or TV, right? Like movies and TV can leave out information and give you clues and stuff, but they can't then like, unless they hide stuff in the background really sneakily or whatever, right? Like there's just such a deeper pool for you to like create these really unique discovery experiences in video games. And I think that's one of the most appealing like story related things about video games. Like You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like in Subnautica, when you find the like huge fish for the first time or whatever, like in a movie that would have been teased and then you would have seen it, but when it's like organically you doing it and you just like happen to wander into a weird spot and see it, that is so much more intensive experience than like the shark coming in Jaws or whatever.
No, yeah, absolutely. Or at least it has a uniqueness to it.
I think it's just much more immersive, right? And that's like the big thing. Immersion is like what defines video game narratives.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, assuming that the rest of the game, I think that's another thing that games have struggled until maybe recently with the technology upgrades is the technology just pulls you out of the experience sometimes.
Yeah, sure, it totally can.
The third-person camera is like such a good example of my beef with the third-person camera. Like I remember playing some of the old RPGs, like even the Final Fantasy X. I remember very specifically there was this one section where I think I just had a bug or some shit because I got in the wall with the camera somehow, and something significant happened, and I missed the whole fucking scene because my camera is behind the wall.
Yeah.
I'll never forget because then I get into this like blitzball tournament. So anyway, like. I agree with you, and I agree, and I think that's worth emphasizing that the fact that the player initiates. I don't necessarily care for the example, but in the Call of Duty Modern Warfare campaign that just came out, at the very end, you're faced in front of the terrorist, and you need to pull the trigger to shoot the guy. You do, and there's no bullet and whatever the fuck. But
you have to pull the trigger.
You don't have to. You don't have to. But the point being that.
But then you do, and there's no bullet, so it's the same either way.
I think that there's a way that you
like
can
a
do
false dichotomy.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't remember if there's a third option where like you actually could legit kill the guy. But the point is, this guy's the bad guy the whole game, and at the very end, his like wife and son are there too, and so. When you make that decision, it's a lot different than you watch a movie of the character doing it. You know,
it's true. Like
you pulled the trigger,
right? You pressed F to pay respects.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember in one of our first podcasts I talked about The Last of Us and how at the end of that game there's a really important decision that Joel has to make, but you have no choice. Like the game basically stalls right until you do the thing that you have to do. That's like really bad and not something like you as the player want to do at all, but it's definitely what Joel would do in the situation. But they don't just make it a cutscene where Joel does it. Like you have to initiate this action, doing this horrible thing and basically like dooming the world because of his life. And so that was like one of the most effective story experiences I've ever had, right? Even though there was literally one option, right? Like you will do that, otherwise you just stop playing the game, I guess, right? But even still, just the fact that you had to click that button made it so much more meaningful and just more thought-provoking, right? Then you think about like, why do I have to do this? And you're like, oh, I guess because no matter what in this situation, this is the decision he would make, even if that's not the decision I would make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely
like how does that happen in a movie ever, right?
No, the best you can do is hope to create a character that the viewer can fill themselves into, you know, and
or like a sympathetic villain, right? Like someone who you can relate to and like feel sympathy for, even though they're making these bad decisions, right? But here you're literally making the bad decision, even if you don't really have a choice. There's still like a feeling there for sure.
Yeah, no. I think that games, and this is maybe the last thing I have to say if you want to wrap up, but games have a unique opportunity to communicate an element of human experience that is otherwise hard to capture in the other mediums. Specifically, it's like something we've talked about a lot of times, like these like subjective reality bubbles that we find ourselves in, right? Like a person is born and like has the biological characteristics they have, and then subsequently experiences a bunch of things and also processes that related to like the context they find themselves in. There's so much that a person arrives to a point where they have like their reality, and it's could potentially so different from the person next to them who may have experienced like literally the same shit, like in a lot of from a metrics and statistics kind of standpoint, but yet they like come out with such a maybe different perspective or experience.
Yeah.
And games have maybe a unique opportunity to help us, like you just said, like put yourself literally in the shoes of these different players. I mean, this is not the most narratively crazy thing by any means. Okay. Don't get me like, I'm not saying this is like the craziest story execution ever, but in Halo 2,
a game that relies almost entirely on cutscenes for story, first of all.
I didn't touch on this. If we do a part 2, we can, but I was going to say, like, I enjoy cutscenes in games. I don't necessarily think all games should do
I would
them.
argue that you haven't played enough games that don't do cutscenes to say this, though.
Yeah, all the games that I played with cutscenes, I like. It kind of is like a dessert at the end of my gameplay. Like, I played the game, I beat the level, and I get a
yes,
reward.
and that's what I said, right? That's, in my opinion, the lazy way to do a story, but it is effective, right? Because it's basically a game and a movie next to each other, right?
Yeah.
And you have both, right? And it's fine. It works, and it worked forever, but that doesn't...
But I also am saying, like, what I'm saying is, at the same time, I think that's not taking advantage of the
unique...
It's
just not taking advantage of the medium.
Anyway,
you were saying in Halo 2.
In Halo 2, like 6 missions in, you take over and play as the guy, the elite, the alien, if you will, that was responsible for the fleet that was making sure Master Chief didn't blow up the Halo in the first game. So basically, this guy gets owned by like the hierarchical leaders of the Covenant. They virtually disown him, send him on a suicide mission as punishment, and you start playing as him. In my opinion, it was extremely enjoyable, and I loved taking care of him. He's very different from the Master Chief, who is just a shell of a character, has no kind of narrative beat. This guy, actually, the Arbiter, has character development. He goes from this like religious, zealous point of view at the beginning of the game to, by the end of the game, realizing like he's getting manipulated and all this shit, and like allying with the good guys. So like his story is actually, from a narrative perspective, much more meaningful and impactful than like Master Chief. Master Chief's just a badass blowing shit up, you know? So anyway, I thought that was that's an example of I thought that a game taking advantage of the medium to put you literally in the shoes of the other side.
I mean, they could have shown you the perspective from both sides, but I think playing it right is very meaningful, especially if the experience is well tailored, right? Because you just feel it more, right? You feel like you experienced it, and that definitely changes like the experience as a whole, I think, right? Like, you were the one who made the decisions, you were the one who did the things, right? Even though you weren't really. Cool
to get like the perspective of the bad guys, if you will, because you're in their ships, you know, you're patrolling with them now, they're talking to you about, it's like you do get to see the other perspective,
right?
So it's cool.
Yeah,
very nice.
Yeah, I honestly, this just makes me excited to like show you a bunch of games.
Yes,
I think a lot of people really don't realize like how unbelievable the like narrative experiences you can get in video games are, because people just generally aren't playing those games as much, right? Like these games like What Remains of Edith Finch, Return of the Aubergine, are not getting the like hype. Outer Wilds, another game that's unbelievable for story exposition. Like all these games that are hugely acclaimed just don't get as much play, right? So it's cool.
This is why
I hope to show people like that these games exist, so that people can see these experiences.
I'm excited to play through them. I mean, this is why I think no matter what, you know, platform you sign your allegiance to or whatever the fuck, you should be happy about the success that the PlayStation Studios had last generation, because their exclusives are like all single player story narrative driven games. You know,
it's true.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the games that the Epic Store features. Epic Store has also done an amazing job of featuring a bunch of these like narrative-driven, really unique experience kind of games, and I like just commend them as well. Considering they made Fortnite, it's cool to see them be like, "Hey, look, there are good games around too. We don't just need our cash monster."
Well, it's kind of like you're saying, like different games, there's those 3 categories you outlined. One that's narrative focused, one that's gameplay focused, and one that try to kind of blend the two. And I think that it makes sense that a lot of the games that you see coming out of AAA studios are aimed at maximizing profit and engagement. And many times even though the PlayStation Studios sold a bunch of copies of their game, the average amount of time spent on a multiplayer game compared to a game that is not multiplayer is significantly more, which raises the opportunity for engagement and monetization opportunities. So it kind of makes sense that you see a lot of AAA studios.
Well,
although that's
I also think people are pretty. It's very superficial, right? Like people's perception of games is relatively superficial. So of course, like someone's gonna be more driven to a gameplay experience than a narrative experience because they're like, oh, it's just like I can get a story from a movie. If I wanted a story, I would watch a movie, right?
And quite frankly, I still really strongly believe it's not easy to do. Like you can't. I think it's probably a little easier to make something that's fun gameplay wise, like at a C level, than it is to make like a C+ level narrative in a game.
Absolutely, yeah. To build the universe, it just takes a lot more effort, right? And a completely different kind of effort than the gameplay design takes.
And there's some stories. Cory Barlog was talking about it in it's some YouTube video, but like you can't. It's not, for example, if you're a game that with no narrative and you pump out 15 levels and you're getting close to ship and you realize you need to cut 3 and you cut 3, then fine, whatever. Like you cut 3, but if your narrative is like front and center, you can't just do that. Like you wreck the story. Like anyway, I personally think Halo 5's campaign sucked for that reason. I think shit got cut, and then it was hard to salvage the story.
Games that are seriously designed around narrative have to be designed around narrative from the beginning, right?
And
so,
priority.
Right, totally. Because the second you like start scrambling up that narrative, you go downhill fast.
Yep. So, yeah, these AAA studios, not only are they trying to maximize profit and everything, but they're trying to minimize risk. And so when you've pumped out multiplayer kind of things before, it's risky to be like, let's try. That's why it's cool what Respawn succeeded with on Jedi Fallen Order, right? Respawn being Apex Legends and Titanfall. And then, although Titanfall 2's campaign was apparently...
tons of people believe that is one of the best games ever made.
Yeah.
People love that game.
So, Respawn's just a great studio. But yeah, Jedi Fallen Order was a single player... it was an action game, but it was still like there's a narrative involved. Whatever.
Yes.
So it's risky. That campaign was litty, Rollick says in chat. Pog.
And we'll end with that. So where can people find us?
You can find us at koalaentertainment.com. There you have links to all our social media, including our Instagram. Most of all, our Discord. Come join the Discord. Yeah, and come hang out, come research.
Woo.
Gain some rewards. We do giveaways all over the place.
Anthony loves giving away free stuff, so come get Anthony's free stuff.
I do. You guys like getting free stuff. I like giving away free stuff. So yeah, check it out. Please consider supporting our studio with some epic merch. We have this shirt, the summer Koalatea shirt. Like literally, the shirt and design is going away after the summer ends. And look at this thing. Ooh, it's the same design, but it's holographic and it's sick as fuck. Yeah, this one's a little tiny, but we're getting them a little bigger. We may even, you'll see, we're going to do some surprises with these. Anyway, yeah, thank you. If you do, we'd love it.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Let us know what you want to hear.
Let us know what you think.
Yep. Go bye.